Story 1, Star Wars, the original trilogy. I estimate I have watched them all more than 150 times. Story 2, watch the Lord of the Rings trilogy back to back, or maybe The Princess Bride. Story 3, Ferris Bueller's Day Off. I saw it a couple of times when it was released, then it hit the Dollar Theater in town, so we went every couple of days, sometimes twice a day, for a month or so. It was within biking distance from my neighborhood. Story 4. It is one of these three. 1. Ghostbusters. 2. Raiders of the Lost Ark. 3. The Fellowship of the Ring. Story 5. Probably A Christmas Story. Not because I particularly like it that much. It's good, though I wouldn't care to ever see it again. More to the point, it's impossible to escape during that season. Story 6. Snatch. I learned English with it. Great movie. For context, I was working about 2 hours from home, so the unlimited cinema ticket deal was very welcome. If the movie was bad, I would take a 2-hour nap. If it was good, I got free English lessons. Story 7. Probably Disney's Robin Hood. You rewatched films a lot when you were a kid, and in the 1980s what you had taped was the limit. Today we are spoiled for choice. Story 8. Definitely Die Hard and Terminator 2. They are objectively the pinnacle of all movies. Story 9. Probably Toy Story. It was my brother's favorite when he was little, and now it is my son's favorite. Story 10. South Park. Bigger, longer, and uncut. It was a special time in my life. Story 11. The Princess Bride is an amazing mix of adventure and humor, with quotable lines that make it endlessly rewatchable. The theme of love and friendship resonates with many. Story 12. When I was a kid, we didn't have cable or satellite, and even the airwaves had no channels. I lived in the middle of nowhere. When we finally got a television and a videocassette recorder, someone gave us the movie Short Circuit. I watched that movie every day after school for an entire school year. Story 13. Princess Bride, Roman Holiday, or Beauty and the Beast. It's one of them. Story 14. I have watched Spaceballs, The Three Amigos, and Army of Darkness easily over 75 times each. Story 15. Finding Nemo. Completely by choice. I do not even have kids, and I am not ashamed in the slightest. There are life lessons to be learned from that film. I am telling you. Story 16. The Beach. Truman Show. Fight Club. Road to El Dorado. Prince of Egypt. Donnie Darko. Mean Girls. Step Brothers. Story 17. Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone and Alice in Wonderland. I was forced by my younger sibling. Story 18. The movie I have seen the most times has to be Jurassic Park. Something about the mix of adventure, nostalgia, and those groundbreaking special effects keeps me coming back. I feel like I notice new details each time I watch it, so it never gets old. Story 19. Shrek. Every time I watch it, it's like discovering new layers of sarcasm and onions. Story 20. Not movies, but television series, which makes it even more amazing. I've watched White Collar from the first to the final season 3 times now, laughing out loud. There are 6 seasons with about 15 to 18 episodes each. Story 21. Wayne's World, Billy Madison, The Wedding Singer, The Wizard of Oz, the original Star Wars trilogy, and all Disney animated movies from the 1990s and earlier explain a lot about my sense of humor. Story 22. I had the video home system version of Ferris Bueller's Day Off. It was all I had. Story 23. It is a toss-up between Jaws, RoboCop, 1986, and Aliens. The Lord of the Rings trilogy is also in the mix. Story 24. The Curious Case of Benjamin Button. I don't know why, I just love the movie. I also like Aliens. Story 25. I'm watching Home Alone, A Christmas Story, and Halloween. All by choice. Laughing out loud. Story 26. Twister embodied everything cool about the 1990s, had a great cast, and piqued my interest in storms and tornadoes when I was a child. I am almost 33 years old and watch it at least once a year. I always rewatch it and notice something new. Story 27. Gangs of New York. I am not American, but the film is based on historical facts, and the costumes and acting are excellent. It is a great piece of entertainment. Story 28. The Emperor's New Groove. I was on a road trip with my family as a child, and we had 2 digital video discs. That movie was one of them. We watched it so many times that we eventually watched it in French despite not speaking French to try something different. After we turned it off, our break was to see if we could recite it word for word, each of us taking half the characters. My mother thought we were insane. Story 29. My friends and I saw Dirty Dancing as many times as we could. It became a competition to see who liked the film the most. I went 7 times. The undisputed winner went 28 times. Story 30. I saw Ghostbusters 5 times in the theater when it was released and countless times streaming. A classic comedy. Story 31. Almost certainly The Sandlot. At summer daycare as a kid, when the younger children had nap time, the older kids watched a movie on the other side of the building. We voted for The Sandlot every day. It drove the adults nuts. Story 32. Die Hard, Terminator 2, American Pie, and Endgame were each watched 7 times. Story 33. Falling Down. I did not have cable, and it was the only movie I owned. It was a good film. Story 34. Ladyhawke. I saw it multiple times in theaters in 1985 when it was released, and I have watched it hundreds of times since. I love everything about it. Yes, I am aware the soundtrack is atrocious. Will I still watch this movie several times a year? Yes, I will. Story 35. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2. The Secret of the Ooze. When I was a little kid, I watched it repeatedly, and recently I watched it with my nephew. Story 36. I fell in love with the film Apollo 13 and the space program after watching it as a teenager. Story 37. The Parent Trap, The Sound of Music, and The Princess Diaries 1 and 2. Story 38. Wall-E for me. I played this movie every day for a year when I was in high school, mostly for background noise and comfort. Story 39. Aliens. It doesn't matter how far in. If I find it, it's on. Story 40. The Karate Kid was the first movie we ever purchased as a family. As an adult, the first movie I bought was probably The Lord of the Rings. Story 41. I had The Nightmare Before Christmas on a video home system tape and one of those small television sets with a built-in video home system player in my room. I would watch it every day after school from 2nd through 6th grade. I do not think any other movie could top that amount of viewing time. Story 42. The only movie I had on a video home system tape as a kid was Ghostbusters, so I have seen it hundreds of times. In my 20s, I fell asleep in front of With Nail and I most weekends. As a parent, I have seen Sing 2, Moana, and Toy Story 1 and 2 about 150 times. Story 43. Glory. I teach United States history, so I show it to all my classes every year. 5 classes over 21 years means I have seen it about 105 times. I always pause it to point out the child's digital watch. Story 44. Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. I worked in a video shop when this came out, and because I was only allowed to play videos rated parental guidance, it was played frequently. Story 45. Barney Live in New York. It still holds my personal record after more than 30 years. My 2-year-old son loved it. Story 46. I have seen Rocky Horror at least 150 times in the cinema. I have also watched it at home and with friends, so I have no idea what the total count is. It is not even my favorite film. Story 47. West Side Story. The Fifth Element. When I had kids, I watched Cars, Frozen, Monsters Incorporated, Moana, Elf. Story 48. Either Casablanca or Citizen Kane. Blade Runner would be up there too. Story 49. Twilight and the next 4 movies are the ones I have seen the most. Laughing a lot. Story 50. Raising Arizona. I have watched it well over 100 times. Still makes me laugh. Story 51. It was probably Bruce Almighty, the movie I fell asleep to every night as a teenager. It is how I learned to spell beautiful. Story 52. When you have toddlers, you cannot keep track of how many times you have watched the same movies. Personally, I have intentionally watched the Lord of the Rings series more than any other. Story 53. Superbad is the best coming-of-age film and the last of its kind. If you know, you know. There are just some movies that could not be made today and receive the same reaction, and this is one of them. Story 54. I am a movie aficionado, so there are many films I have seen more than a dozen times, including True Grit with John Wayne, The Mask, John Wick, The Kingdom, Midway, Tora Tora Tora, The Good, The Bad, and the Ugly, Rocky, Rocky Balboa, Buckaroo Banzai, and a score of others. The top is probably the Rocky Horror Picture Show in the theater, which I have watched 30 or 40 times and about 4 times streaming. My friend says he has watched it in the theater 60 or 70 times, and I know people who have attended over 100 times. Story 55. Mean Girls. It was one of the few movies on my iPod Classic. One summer I had a ritual. I watched it twice each afternoon and once before bed. It's not a bad movie, but it's far from my favorite. I've seen it at least 100 times. Story 56. Man of La Mancha. Beneath the whimsy there is a message. Look for the good in everything and everyone. Story 57. 300 by my choice. Despicable Me 1, 2, and 3 as requested by my son. Story 58. Astro Boy. I loved that movie. I rewatched it 10 years later and it was absolutely terrible, but whatever. Story 59. Since I do not have children to ruin my movie time, the ones I actually like are Hot Fuzz, The Empire Strikes Back, Mystery Men, and Liar Liar. I am not sure which is my favorite because I never counted. Story 60. I watched Jim Carrey's Grinch movie so much as a kid that I could close my eyes on long car rides and watch it again. Even now at 35, I can quote every single line and annoy my wife. That said, someone else pointed out being forced to watch a movie repeatedly because of their kids. With that taken into account, I have probably watched Coco more. Story 61. Good Burger. 1997. The sequel was trash, but I watched it way too much as a kid. Story 62. The Lord of the Rings. The Fellowship of the Ring or Gladiator. There's a tie between them. Story 63. The Goofy Movie. I loved it as a kid, and during the pandemic lockdown I showed it to my daughter. I lost count of how many times we watched it. Story 64. My buddies and I would go once a week when it played in $1 theaters in the 1980s. I have seen it at least 100 times. Story 65. Bolt, Tangled, or Frozen. I was a very passionate child about the things I liked. I used to rip those digital versatile discs and Blu-ray discs. Story 66. Diary of a Mad Black Woman and the Day After Tomorrow. I have no idea why these are my favorite movies, but they are. Story 67. Heavyweights. Nearly every day before bed one summer as a child. Ben Stiller was so unhinged. Story 68. Forrest Gump derails my weekends when I stumble across it on television. Story 69. That's been my mantra for the last 7 years. I watch a Harry Potter marathon from December 23rd to December 30th, and I conclude the year with It's a Wonderful Life every December 31st. I start the new year thankful to God for blessing my loved ones. Story 70. The Nightmare Before Christmas came out when I was 11 and has been one of my favorites ever since. Story 71. I have watched Madagascar 3, Europe's most wanted more than any other film since 2012. Over 12 years later, I still watch and love it. Story 72. Tequila Sunrise, Michelle Pfeiffer, Mel Gibson, and Kurt Russell. Story 73. Misery, 1990. Holes, 2003. And the Halloween series. Story 74. Interstellar, Forrest Gump, and The Count of Monte Cristo. Can't say which one is first overall, but I've watched all 3 countless times. Story 75. I have watched Beyond the Silence more than 50 times. I still watch it on digital video disc every now and then. Story 76. I think that would be Black Hawk Down. I love war movies, especially this one, as it is one of the most realistic and accurate portrayals of how the events unfolded in real life. Story 77. Probably The Phantom Menace. I think I saw it 9 times in the theater that summer. Story 78. I have a 5-year-old. I have seen so many Disney movies that I don't even know them anymore. Story 79. I watch the Lord of the Rings trilogy every year for my birthday, and whenever I'm in the mood for a comfort movie. Story 80. I watched many, including Zootopia, Dolittle, Spider-Man, No Way Home, and many others. Story 81. It is probably The Godfather. If I like a movie, I can watch it over and over, like a favorite song. The Marvel Cinematic Universe films, My Cousin Vinny, the 1960s version of The Magnificent Seven, and The Great Escape are also among my favorites. Story 82. The Aristocats. I used to watch it every weekend at my grandma's because it was one of the 3 movie cassettes she had and I didn't like the others. I really love that movie. Story 83. Interstellar. A masterpiece of storytelling, cinematography, and visual effects. Story 84. My top 3 are the silly Saturday Night Live comedies from the 1990s. As a teenager, my favorite was Happy Gilmore. I was obsessed with that movie because it had the right balance. For every silly moment there was something serious. For every loss there was a victory. And for every heartache there was a heart made full. Despite its silliness, the film has wholehearted charm. The protagonist goes on an adventure to help his grandmother. I liked how Happy acts on impulses many people wish they could act on but usually do not because legal bills are expensive. Honorable mentions are Coneheads in second place and Beverly Hills Ninja in third. When stupid and silly are done so well, they become brilliant. Story 85. Tremors. I love that movie. I saw it in theaters when it came out, and we even used to play Tremors when we were kids, laughing out loud. We would take guns that fired ball bearings, jump into the backs of trucks, and climb trees. Story 86. Paddington and Paddington 2 are both my comfort films when I struggle to sleep. Story 87. Hands down, it is Star Wars. A New Hope or Star Wars. The Empire Strikes Back. Story 88. When my youngest was little, it was All Dogs Go to Heaven repeatedly. Story 89. Nothing could ever top how many times I watched The Land Before Time as a kid. I tried rewatching it as an adult, but it just did not have the same appeal. I never got into the sequels. The tone felt like such a departure from the original that even my younger self, who was obsessed with it, could see it was a cash grab. Story 90. By far the most watched film is The Crucible, starring Winona Ryder and Daniel Day-Lewis. I teach the play to my 11th graders and we watch the film adaptation, typically 2 to 4 classes per year for about 15 years. The film is almost verbatim to the play, so I can recite nearly the entire thing from memory. For pure entertainment, it is probably Dirty Dancing. Story 91. The Blues Brothers, Stripes, Alien, Pink Floyd's The Wall. Story 92. The Shawshank Redemption. Dazed and Confused. The Shining. The Count of Monte Cristo. Story 93. It is either The Big Lebowski or Big Trouble in Little China. I think the latter because I basically grew up with it, but the former made a grand debut in college, laughing out loud. Story 94. Dinner for One, if that counts as a movie. Otherwise, Dirty Dancing. Story 95. Any of the Bourne movies. The Scrooge or Christmas Carol adaptations. White Christmas. Story 96. Probably Mean Girls. Back in the old cable days, Stars ran a Mean Girls marathon. I watched it all day while playing Pokemon Ruby on my Game Boy Advance. A friend and I had scheduled a Pokemon battle for the following week, and it was going to be broadcast to all my friends on my parents' large-screen television using the Nintendo GameCube Game Boy Advance player. So I was leveling up my team in preparation. I was not going to lose and look like a bitch in front of everyone. Story 97. The movie 3 Idiots always miraculously aired on television whenever I had an exam. I couldn't resist watching it. It was my guilty pleasure. Story 98. My comfort films are The Lord of the Rings and Pride and Prejudice. Story 99. Tenacious D in the Pick of Destiny. Or The Lord of the Rings trilogy. Story 100. I once went with a couple of friends to a rented cabin for a bachelor party with drugs and games. They had some digital video discs there, and we put the movie Big Fat Liar starring Frankie Muniz, Amanda Bynes, and Paul Giamatti on repeat for the entire 3-day weekend. Story 101. During the late 1990s when I was young and fun, I watched Austin Powers' International Man of Mystery and Swingers on repeat. Now I probably watch Frozen for my kids and The Karate Kid because my wife loves it. Story 102. The 1986 Transformers movie was on every night. I had issues with darkness as a kid, so I'd have that movie on to provide light and noise for 4 years. I wore out 3 video home system tapes. I can still reliably quote the entirety of the movie from start to finish, and I'm 41. Story 103. George of the Jungle. Watch out for that tree. I must have seen it 50 times, as my daughter insisted on watching it every Sunday for over 2 years. Story 104. Back to the Future or Wayne's World. I still cannot resist either. Story 105. Probably The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I used to work at a video rental place and I played it every day. Story 106. I like Harry Potter, mainly the Goblet of Fire and the Half-Blood Prince. I also like The Lord of the Rings. Guess how old I am? Laughing out loud. Story 107. Probably The Matrix. I saw it in a theater when it first came out and it blew my mind. Story 108. Just because I taught 9th grade for 10 years, Romeo and Juliet. Out of the Classroom. The Green Mile. Story 109. The first Pirates of the Caribbean movie was the digital versatile disc I received for Christmas in 2003. I know it line by line. Story 110. The first Avatar. My ex's 4-year-old son had to watch it every day or he would freak out. It lasted about a year before the disc finally wore out in the Blu-ray player. I had to tell him it was the only copy. Story 111. Twister. My brother was obsessed. I'm pretty sure he wore out the tape. We watched it over 100 times. Story 112. Aside from the movies I have watched hundreds of times with my young daughter, it has to be Howl's Moving Castle. Story 113. Oh brother, where art thou? And The Fifth Element are nostalgic movies for me. I grew up watching them anytime they were on cable with my dad. Now when I watch them, I realize they are not only nostalgic but also great movies. Story 114. I have watched the original Star Wars trilogy more than anything else, followed by the first 3 Alien movies. Story 115. Probably Deadpool and Wolverine or Polar Express. It's a German film. Story 116. This Taiwanese film Neshinan Wamiichi Joidenir Hayu are the apple of my eye. Story 117. I watched Lords of Dogtown every day for about 2 years while taking pills with my skater friends. Story 118. I watched The Fellowship of the Ring this morning. I have no idea how many times I have seen all 3 Lord of the Rings movies, but it is a frightening amount. Obsessive, I would say. Story 119. I have a daughter who watched Aladdin every day, sometimes more than once. The Hunt for Red October. Casablanca. The Big Chill. Story 120. Kuch Kuch Hoda Hai. Story 121. I think I've watched Remember the Titans more than I can count. Story 122. Goodfellas, The Book of Eli, Jeremiah Johnson, The Outlaw Josie Wales, The Godfather, and Saving Private Ryan. I haven't watched Jeremiah Johnson in some years, but I would drop everything when it came on. Story 123. The Professional, The Shawshank Redemption, and The Gentleman. Story 124. Mad Max. Fury Road, the Black and Chrome edition, was without a doubt the one I saw most. I did not like Furiosa at all, and I was the first person in the cinema when it was released. Story 125. I've seen Harry Potter, Dune, Villains, Man of Steel, Coraline, Interstellar, and Dawn of the Planet of the Apes so many times I don't know. Story 126. Either Star Wars, A New Hope, or The Phantom Menace. I watched them non-stop as a kid. Story 127. When I was 12, my mother and I were homeless and slept in our car for about 6 months. Once we got an apartment, we had nothing and had to start over completely. Someone gave us a television and a digital video disc player, but for about a month all we had was a bootleg copy of Shrek the Third. It did not have a menu, so when the movie ended, it restarted at the beginning. We also did not have cable for a while, so that was the only entertainment in the house. It did not help that I was on summer break, so I did not even have the escape of going to school for something different. It was the only time in my life that I looked forward to weekends with my father because he had cable. I have not watched that movie since, but I could probably still quote most of it if it were on. Story 128. Remember the Titans was the only movie I had for a while when we did not have wireless internet. Story 129. Not sure exactly, but it will be one of these. The Titfield Thunderbolt, Soylent Green, Jason, and the Argonauts. They are my go-to films when I feel off. Story 130. Television shows. 1. The Office. 2. House Medical Doctor. 3. The Big Bang Theory. Story 131. Star Wars. A New Hope and Steel Magnolias are probably tied. I saw Star Wars. A New Hope in the theater 7 times before my parents would not pay for it anymore. Then a few more times on digital video disc and streaming. I usually catch Steel Magnolias whenever I see it on cable. Story 132. My best friend in high school was trying to get with a girl who liked Fight Club, so we had it on repeat for more than 24 hours. This was before we were old enough to drive and before cell phones were common. I think it is a good movie, but I personally dislike it because I have seen it so much. Story 133. Dazed and Confused and Straight Outta Compton are both terrible recreations of the past, but I love them. Story 134. It was probably Hitch. Not by choice. It was the only ready-to-play movie on a platform included in our cheap cable package that I could play without commercials when I was a kid, so I remember seeing it a lot. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.